Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Kodiak Shack podcast. Today I have Eagle Wu from Vinci VR, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about VR that he's working on, some XR, and his background. Remember some admin stuff. Please like, share, and subscribe to whatever platform you're listening or watching on, and tell your friends about the show, and then talk about all the good stuff and the good programs that we're working on. Eagle, thanks for being here today, and his background before I hand the mic over to him. Eagle was at Babson College, and while he was there, he decided to create a startup, and then got into the VR space. He ended up moving over to the cyberspace, and we'll learn all about that. So, Eagle, thanks for being here with us. Go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Vader. So my name is Eagle. While a sophomore at Babson College, started my startup Vinci VR, which I am still running to this day. So uh, just a general kind of VR. We're creating like a VR training platform for different industries, whether it's in the defense side, but also we have some stuff going on in the kind of private sector with specifically renewable energy.
That's pretty cool. And then, so Babson, maybe I'm the only one, but where's Babson College?
I get that question a lot, in all honesty. It's in Wellesley. It's a small business school.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah, small business school, kind of in the middle of Massachusetts, like right in the literal middle of Massachusetts. Yeah, it's all business school. You can only get one major, which is bachelor's in business administration. So.
Okay, nice. And then, so what made you go into the VR space? So obviously you're getting your bachelor's in business, and then what was the push towards VR?
Gaming, definitely gaming.
Nice.
I would say I'm definitely, I guess, at least in the defense kind of industry, I'm definitely a younger guy. I'm only 20, 25, but gaming has always been just like a huge part of my life, especially growing up and even in college. And I originally just wanted, like, I had the original kind of Vive headset, which if people haven't seen, like the developer kit for the Vive is this giant monstrosity with all these cables that have to go into all over your freaking computer. But I had that was my first set, and I really wanted to just make video games. Like there were a lot of like janky little small VR video games online that you can kind of buy and download, and I wanted to make my own video games. So that's kind of where that start came from.
Yeah, because we had at my last base at Holloman, we had four of the Vives. I think it wasn't the Focus. It was the one you were talking about where you have to put the sensors up in the corners, and all the sensors have to be working for everything to work. And yeah, it was cumbersome to say the least. It seems like VR technology has come a long way. So when you're so you want to create video games, but you're a business major, right? So how do you go from, I'm going to create a business that's going to create video games? Who do you go and reach out to? Because I assume you're not making the software and developing the games yourselves.
Well, actually, I did in the beginning.
Oh, nice.
So sophomore, so at Babson, I started like oddly enough at Babson of all places. They didn't have like any like kind of tech club or anything for undergrads. Despite, I would say in the 21st century, at least technology is just such a huge part of business in general. Even if you're not selling a technology, everyone is using it, right? So I started a tech club on campus, and we got like our own little special housing area, the nerd house basically is what it was. But sophomore year, no, I spent like I remember spending like weekends and afternoons just going on tutorials, learning this game engine called Unity. So I learned how to develop in Unity to create like a video game. Like it was a super jank video game, but it worked. The game was super simple. You just pull apart an engine. Like I was trying to recreate that scene in Iron Man where Tony Stark pulled apart his Iron Man suit, a hologram, but in
Yeah, it's
VR.
very cool.
Yeah, so I just found these 3D models with like an engine. I found an Iron Man suit actually. I made a super jank Unity game where you can kind of pull it apart and you can learn more about the engine that I found on Wikipedia, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's pretty cool. Well, did that kind of transfer? I mean, I haven't seen what you guys are working on with the maintenance side of stuff, but is that what was your vision for that of, hey, let's expand this out and see what the guts are?
Yeah, yeah. Our first our first actual like work with the defense sector. Actually, our first actual work period at Vinci was with the defense sector when it came to training. It was actually with the Army, not the Air Force. So Babson has like this MBA program, so a lot of grad school students go there, and one of my best friends actually still at the time he was a part-time MBA, and he worked full-time at the Natick Research Lab. So that's like the U.S. Army's kind of premier research center, at least in Massachusetts. So I forgot where, but I'm pretty sure it was like some kind of event on campus where I just set up the VR and I was just showing like off my janky little app that I built, and he saw it and he was like, "Could I think there's a few people in the army that I think you might want to talk to because I think there might be a way we could like swap out the engines and actually put in real equipment." So that was kind of it was the same exact principle, right, of the technology. But now instead of pulling apart an engine, you're teaching a soldier how to like inspect a sling load and make sure that there are no deficiencies, right? So it's kind of the same application, same technology, but just now you're replacing the model itself.
Well, that's cool. And then how do you go from, standing there at an event and being told, hey, you should contact someone at the Army to actually getting into the innovation space? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the short story basically is I met with Caleb at like the research center. It was basically like on a college campus somewhere. It was like a satellite campus for the for Natick Labs, and I met with that team. At the time, like VR for them, they're like a cognitive research group, but they did do a lot of VR, AR. Obviously, the Army now has kind of gone all the way into augmented reality with the whole IVAS system. But that team was like working on HoloLens. Like I'm pretty sure some of the research contributed to that. I might be wrong, but you guys can probably do your due diligence on that one. But
Yeah.
um, so at the time, their VR was like a cave system, which is basically you just have a bunch of giant screens, like floor to ceiling screens around you, and that was pretty much as immersive as it got. So I remember like just setting up like as you mentioned the base stations in this conference room, loading up my jank app, and letting these random army researchers just put on a headset, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, this is so much better than the dome. This is 100 times better than the dome." And they're like, can we put in like a test equipment? We have this relationship or project going on with the 101st out in Fort Campbell, and they're having this issue where they need to train soldiers how to inspect these sling loads, and it's turning out to be a big headache. Can we load this into VR? So I said, sure. It's going to cost a little bit of money. At the time, I was a naive kid. Probably should have known better, but at the time, a lot of money to me was like 5 to 10 grand.
Yeah.
Which in hindsight to the Department of Defense, that's not even a drop in a bucket. That's
Yeah, they got a good deal on that one.
yeah, it's a speck of bacteria in that drop of water. Uh,
Yeah.
but no, I remember getting it. I reached out to a few friends of mine who were 3D modelers. Um, they 3D modeled like this sling load equipment, this like bag, essentially this A22 bag, and then once I got the model, I just like added stuff to it in VR, and that was our first project.
That's pretty cool. And then, so before we kind of get into some more details there, where are we living? So let's go back to the motor where, Tony Stark like expands out the motor, expands out his suit. Where is like reality? And then where is the point of this is now fiction and this is not something that could be done with today or even like mildly in the future's tech?
Yeah, I would say. So Tony Stark's hologram is probably you could probably do that with like augmented reality headsets like the HoloLens too, for sure. But you got to put on this big janky little essentially brick on your head for it to work. Like true holograms where you're not wearing a headset, that's at least probably a decade at most, at least behind. Um,
But you can interface with it. So say you're wearing the augmented reality lenses, you can actually interface with the stuff and make it turn and like remove parts. And
yeah.
it's like, oh, that stuff's deleted now.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't really dabble as much into AR, but from the few kind of HoloLens demos I've seen, yeah, that's like one of the first demos on a HoloLens One is you have a space shuttle, like this little hologram space shuttle floating from you. And you can kind of like, you can't grab it, but you can do like little hand gestures to pull it apart. I'm pretty sure that's the same with HoloLens too. But that's kind of like, that's kind of where the technology's at. You're not fully interacting with a like floating hologram like Iron Man.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. So now I assume that's still feasible in the VR space. It just has to be entirely developed, right?
Yeah, so I would say with VR, yes and no. The issue with VR is that you can't like you're in your own world, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
that
there's
makes
there's
sense.
there's benefits and limitations to that, right? Like if you want to train um like for example, pilots, you're a pilot. So pilots are actually using this really cool new AR tech. We didn't build it. It was another company. They're using this really cool AR tech where you can like kind of have like flying holograms of like planes and stuff, enemy planes or other systems, and you can train that way. But that's where AR really shines, just when you're trying to put on more overlays into your real world, whereas VR is like you're replacing an entire world. Um,
Yeah.
that's kind of one of the limitations. So you could have that high fidelity hologram that you're grabbing and pulling apart, but it's entirely in like your own little space. You don't see the rest of the world around you.
But if you're trying to teach someone these sling mounts, then really all you need is a VR world. You don't need augmented reality, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to the problem being solved. Like for the army, one of the big issues they had was they just didn't have enough equipment. So to give you some insight into it, like we actually went down to Fort Campbell to the South Alaska Air Assault School, and like we went and tried to understand why they were having this issue. And it's the same issue within the Air Force too, right? It's just not able to get these really expensive pieces of equipment and get hands-on time with them. And then the time that they do get on with them, it's like, you get one or two iterations and that's it. So if you're a soldier, you're tired all day and you're expected to, get one or two hands-on opportunities with a piece of, large complex piece of equipment, obviously you're going to have a pretty high fail rate. So
Yeah.
that's where VR comes in. Kind of like that's where it comes in the best is like when you just don't have access to environmental equipment.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, so a parallel to that, and I don't want to scare people who are traveling, but if you're flying on American, United, like any of those, the first time a new pilot at one of those companies actually flies and lands one of their airplanes is with passengers in the back. Because they don't just fly lines, they don't fly airplanes empty so guys can get training. They put them through months and months of simulator training. And granted, these simulators are real good, but their first flight is with passengers in the back. And so it's hey, it costs us millions of dollars to put this airplane in the air. We're not going to spend that, to get you reps. We're going to put you in something like a VR space or something like that to now make your first rep a useful one rather than getting training there. So I understand that. That makes sense.
Well, it's not. That's a kind of thing that's in a lot of industries, like
Oh
wind
yeah.
turbine technicians.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
these wind turbine machines are getting so big that the first time a lot of these guys actually like get hands on is on the job on a real live actual turning thing. Uh,
Wow.
Same even with our project of JTACs, right? Like we're simulating a war zone with a near peer enemy. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that doesn't actually happen in real life. But the
Yeah.
first time they might deal with that is not going to be, it's going to be in real life, right? So um, I think simulations have gone to the point where they're realistic enough. They're obviously there's holes, but they're realistic enough that for a certain kind of task, you can go probably from simulation to real life.
Yeah. And I mean, that's good that we have the technology now and that companies are leveraging it. So we'll back up real quick. So obviously you do this first one, you, sounds like you make good on that contract. And then this kind of gets you started into the defense side of innovation. So where do you go next? So after that, how do you find yourself applying for SIBRs, getting SIBRs? Like, how do you learn the whole space?
Yeah, so where we went next was with AFWorks, and this was like back in 2017, 2018, when AFWorks was really like getting started. Um, so I'm not sure if you've covered earlier in different podcasts like what AFWorks is, but just like a
Yeah.
quick rundown, AFWorks kind of the whole point of AFWorks is to get dual use technologies from like small companies and startups and bring them into the Air Force. The idea is like, the Air Force won't fall behind as much in like the speed of the private sector essentially. So um, we worked with AFWorks, and there was at the time it was brand new. Like a lot of they had this thing called the Open Topic SIBR. So SIBRs are like these small kind of innovation grants that small companies can apply for. Traditionally, the way it works is you have like a program manager that has a specific issue that they need fixed, and then they post out like, "Hey, we're looking for white papers or companies that might be able to solve this." But AFWorks kind of turned the whole process on its head, where you as a company now have to find the end user, like the people in the Air Force with the problem. And then you need to present to AFWorks, like, here is the problem, here is our solution. And then if it's a good match, then, you get the SIBR and you can go and you build your project. So that at the time was like kind of revolutionary. It was I don't think anyone else in the Department of Defense has like something like that or a program like that. So frankly, when I did it, it was probably like the second open topic like ever,
Oh yeah.
and there was I won't say confusion, but there were people were like just I think everyone was figuring out as it was going on, and it worked. It did end up working. So we did an open topic. We applied for the phase one. At the time, AFWorks was a really small team, so we were able to actually talk with the people that are running the program, like leadership, and like understand what they were going for, what they were looking for, what was the goal intention of these kind of newer versions of these SIBRs. And that eventually led us to get a phase two, and then we kind of just kept going from there.
Yeah, I think one of the things, like you said, it was a big game changing event for the sheer fact that people, one, had to be informed enough to know what's out there, and two, go and ask for it in the timely manner to actually get the SIBR applied for and allocated and awarded. Where an open topic allows companies with products that we didn't even know existed to say, "Hey, check this out," and the Air Force say, "Oh man, we need that," because any other acquisitions process is exactly that. Hey, figure out what's out there and then go buy it. And the problem is, like, if, a lot of times military members, secondary or tertiary job, that they don't have time to go scour the internet or scour every single VR company for products that they could use, that have them come to AFWorks. And then now you have one centralized location for that. Because we've seen it with aircraft acquisitions. You have an old airplane getting updated parts and equipment and electronics that is not the most advanced because they didn't know there was something more advanced, so they asked for the wrong thing. And if they could just say, "Hey, give us your best thing for this price," it would have made it much better. So I think that's good that they created that. So then, what was your first SIBR that you got awarded for?
Yeah, we were doing aircraft maintenance or avionics training specifically with AETC, or Air Education Training Command. So, we went down to an Air Force base. We learned like what they were trying to teach in a curriculum, what their issues were, and same issues I pointed out in the Army, which is just a lot of the kind of training, hands-on training tools we're using were super outdated. So going in, building a VR version of an aircraft that they can actually use for training was kind of the main idea. Yeah.
Well, it's good. The one thing that it makes me think about is when you're going through like a pilot training, you pretty much have like 5 exposures for everything because you have your initial academics, and then you have like an advanced academic, and then you have a baseline sim, you have an advanced sim, and then you have a flight. So you have a lot of touch points with this information to make it useful and make it stick. So this is where taking something and being able to get more reps and provide them high quality training is just going to make that stuff better as they get out there. So then you guys get awarded that. Where are you guys working with for that one with that Cyber 2?
Yeah, so that one was completed like a year and a half ago at this point. But yeah,
Okay,
we were working with the 82nd Training Wing, Alan Shepard's Air Force Base.
nice.
So avionics tech school basically was where we were focused on at the time. Yeah.
That's cool. And then you move on to who are you working with after them? Like
Yeah.
for your
So
next one.
bit of a pivot to put it lightly. We moved to trying to build like what we call like the next generation JTAC trainer. So I mean, full disclosure, there's like 20 other companies working on like a VR JTAC trainer. JTAC is Joint Terminal Attack Controllers. Their best way of putting it is guys on the ground with embedded with like ground forces, and they coordinate aircraft for close air support or strikes. But there's as I mentioned, there's competition. There's 20 other like companies, probably even more, working on some kind of JTAC VR thing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to just test the boundaries of the technology and see how immersive we can truly make it. So that includes bringing in things like VR treadmills, rifles, mixed reality, all these different aspects on top of just the enhanced immersiveness that you get from VR, and utilizing newer game engines like Unreal Engine to actually get as realistic as we can get in terms of graphics fidelity. So
With that, I have 2 questions.
yeah,
One, are you guys intending, or are they intending to use that 360 audio?
360
So have
audio.
you seen that where it's like directional based audio? So
Oh
if
yeah,
gunfire is from your right side, you hear it over there.
yeah. So the beauty of these newer game engines like Unreal Engine is that's usually built in when you're talking about like a VR plugin. Um, so yeah, that's definitely something that's going to be kind of baked into it. Same with just having just a 360 visual immersion as well, but that's kind of a given with a VR headset.
And then when you're actually taking this engine and producing a VR program or something on it, like what does that look like? Because what separates your first hack at VR, how it was, as you refer to it, janky, to today, which is obviously like a commercial product that's solid. I mean, what goes into it that makes one better than the other in the development?
Talent, talent. Yeah, no, seriously. Like we have an art director on our team. He he is not just good at so I'll give you an example. So there's one thing to make a a 3D model that's detailed of, I don't know, a tank or something. But it's another thing to make it so that you have a textured tank that looks realistic, right? Like oftentimes when we see a lot of these like combat simulations, everything looks like it just rolled off the factory floor for some reason. Um,
Yeah.
so adding in things like different. details like that, dirt, grime on a tank, making sure that the lighting and coloring works well with the environment, that the environment is all set up right. So there's a whole side of the art direction that I didn't even know existed until we actually hired someone that has done that before. Um, so it's not just, hey, how do we create a realistic, or how do we create a detailed 3D environment? It's how do we create a environment that is actually realistic and looks and feels realistic. Those kind of small details that matter. That's one. And the second thing is really just research. A lot of research with the customer, with kind of skilled developers. So like we actually went out to Nellis Air Force Base and we like rode around in like this. So at Nellis they have like a test almost for JTACs right before they get sent to their operational units. So we rode around and like for 2 hours, Lincoln City, Nevada, or wherever in the middle of the desert was a battlefield, and we sat and we learned and we understood the problem set pretty deeply, and from there we were able to like get a lot better engineering specs. So those are like kind of like some of the small differences between that jank project I built in college to this.
When I think there's like you're talking about how immersive it is and how true to life, the sun glint off of things and the shadows and all those little things that you don't probably always know that you notice, but you notice it and it just makes you feel like, this is right. The have you seen DCS?
Yeah, digital combat simulator. Love that game.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty. I would say that at least for a flying VR, that's about as good as graphics as I've seen. Would you agree? I mean, not to talk about other VR in front of you, but
No, I love DCS. I play that game on a regular. There's
oh yeah,
also
you
another
ever?
one.
Oh,
Yeah,
what's that?
there's also another game called VTOL VR. It's that one is actually so DCS was actually originally built not for VR. It was built like for computer and mouse. But
Mm,
there's a VR game called VTOL VR that was specifically built for VR from the ground up. So I love those
even
games.
better.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
mind talking about them.
Yeah. The so and that's what you're talking about, like the uh I guess the definition and how just the quality of the image that you experience, that's what really makes VR different. And it's for someone who's good at what they do and writing that. Cause all of that is, I mean, I'm not a tech guy. So is that code? Like that's literally writing the code and
Yeah,
getting the imagery correct.
it's a mix of code and art. So the modeling itself, like our team goes into like Photoshop and they paint on textures, right? Like it's a manual. It's literally a manual process that just takes hours and work. Yeah,
When you're so when you're talking about this JTAC specific product and you're building a VR space for them to get this end user training, which right now I think it's called the dome, right? When
yeah,
they go in there, it's just a bunch of screens that they're interacting with, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so now when you're building a VR space, the thing you run into is you build an immersive environment, but now they can't see their hands, they can't see their radios and things like that. So is that why you guys are kind of moving to the mixed reality side of it?
Yeah, and this is where we like to at least think that we are different than kind of the other solutions is, and it's a risk. It's frankly a huge technological risk whether or not this will actually work. But um, no one has really cracked like, for example, how do you write in VR, right?
Right.
That's
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 true.
that's a legitimate question. That was actually we could have that was actually a big question mark that a lot of the TAC Bs raised to us. They're like, we write 9 lines. That is like our main weapon is not our M4. It is our notepad and our radio.
Yeah.
How do you write in VR, right? So it just kind of goes back to like the kinds of training. there is, frankly, there's JTAC training that you probably don't necessarily need to write 9 lines. Maybe you're like just trying to teach someone how do you recognize that the nose geometry or an airplane is kind of pointing in the right direction, is flying the right direction. You don't necessarily need VR for that, but we're talking about like something to fully replace a dome. How do you write? So we've done what our solution currently is we're utilizing this VR headset called the Vario or the Varjo, and it has this mixed reality capability where you can essentially have a cutout in your VR world. So one way of thinking about it is like you're in your VR environment, you're on a hill somewhere in Eastern Europe or something, and then you pull up a clipboard, and this clipboard, your real life clipboard, is now like shows up in your VR world. Like there's a little cutout of it, and you can start writing your 9 line on it. And what that actually also allows us to do is it allows us to like bring in things like ATAC directly in without having to like recreate all of ATAC in VR, which we could do, but we probably don't have the time or resources to do.
Yeah. Well, and it'd probably be prohibitively expensive rather than just getting a cutout.
Yeah.
So now the question is, how does VR, because now we're talking about, it's not just VR, because now we need a camera out the front of these VR goggles that is always looking. And the moment it sees this clipboard, so I assume it's looking for a shape or an image or whatever to say, pass this directly through to the eyeball. Is that how that works? Like, how's the software doing that?
Currently, that's how we've programmed it to kind of work. Again, it's a technological risk. Like,
yeah,
this is such a new project that, like, if we had the same conversation a year from now, I am 99% sure that we'll have a different solution, or maybe not a completely different like concept, but a different way of implementing it. It's 100% iterative process. We're dealing with really cutting edge stuff. Like even our rifle that we're using for the training, I actually have one right here. So like
nice.
Our first iteration was this thing. This is like basically just an airsoft rifle. So you have, it works pretty much like a real thing, and we put a tracker on it, and we essentially hot wired a switch to go on the trigger so that when you pull the trigger, it sends a signal to this VR tracker that you're shooting the rifle. What we found, though, is that on the logistical side, it's not practical because it's a gas-powered rifle, so you have to like constantly feed it with gas. So instead, we went with another solution that is like a haptech rifle. It's an electric blowback rifle, and actually has like 80% the kick of an actual like 5.56 round. It's a lot.
Yeah.
We're a little worried that it'll knock the tracker off at some point, but even that technology, like the haptech rifles, like that's only like a year or two old at this point, right? That technology, it's new. The VR treadmill, the 360 treadmill, that itself is only like a few years old, and that's like it's definitely a new piece of hardware, right? There's software and hardware kinks that have to be kind of figured out, as all new products have to be, right? But that's the risk. Even the Vario, to an extent, is still like the whole mixed reality thing. That's still a new concept. So,
one, I think as the software is going to get better, the hardware is going to get better, all that stuff, just slowly but surely, it's just going to get better and better. Because you think about, especially with JTAC, so a guy who's going to be going from his ATAC, which ATAC, for everybody who doesn't understand, think like a big iPhone or a Samsung that has a digital, pretty much like a game, or like think Google Maps on it. And then you can drop points, you can draw lines, you can pull ranges, you can do all those things. You can actually pull GPS coordinates off of it. And where you can zoom in, because the dudes in the airplanes actually use it as well, because it is so nice. Because turns out 80-year-old airplane doesn't have good interactive moving maps. So they'll zoom in and they'll pull coordinates and they'll say, hey, this is what it looks like, and they have these great maps for it. So now they transition from that. they're going to have a pen and paper where they're writing the 9 line or they're typing it into something. Then they're going to have their radio. Then they're going to have their M4. And all of these things have to be accessible while they're immersed in this VR space. So that's where the XR, I mean, it's not one challenge. It's not a clipboard. It's his writing space, his ATAC, his gun. All of the above need to be seamlessly accessible in his VR world or mixed reality world.
It's ambitious. Will it work? I mean, I hope so, but I'm not 100% sure if all like parts of it will work. Parts of it will definitely work, but there's questions on like how well the treadmill is, for example. Like, will be too much? Will be too much of like a cognitive overload for someone to do all of it? But the intention really is like if you want to move towards like the concept of train like you fight, you might as well go all the way and go for it. So that's kind of the idea. Yeah, just keeping track of all these like different things, your ATAC, your clipboard, your rifle, your push to talk, your like you have to keep track of all this stuff all at once, and it has to be perfect.
Yeah. And you either have to build all that stuff in the VR space or put trackers on everything so it then transitions into the VR space. But I just imagine, again, I'm not a JTAC, TAC-P, CCT, but I can only imagine transitioning from one, call it media, whether it's your radio to your gun, and then you like, okay, now in the simulation, your gun jams, and now you're in VR and you can't see all the switches and do everything. So there's probably so much training that, again, the nice thing about the SIBR process is that it is iterative. They don't say, here's one chunk of change, and in the end of 12 months or 18 months, give us a fully developed product. It's going to be slowly but surely as the tech comes along, as the software comes along, it's going to get better and better. And hopefully, in 2 or 3 years, hopefully we're talking about the most advanced JTAC mixed reality trainer out there,
Yeah, that's a really important thing that you mentioned about the SIBR is for other SIBR. So for example, we have actually another SIBR for like the Department of Energy, and that's not an open topic, right? And the milestones, like what you have to deliver to for like the end of each kind of section of the SIBR is very specific. Like you have to deliver these specific items. With AppWorks, with these open topics, you have the freedom to essentially be like, hey, for this milestone, we're just going to deliver iterations 3 or 4, where like you're not going to know at the start like how well it's going to work. And I think that's kind of the beauty of the open topics is it does give you the freedom to both take risks, I guess. That's one thing, but also to iterate, right? Like you're not just taking blind risks, but you're still being able to do or utilize kind of that iterative design process.
Yeah. I think that's where we run into problems when we ask for a fully developed thing that doesn't have an iterative process. Now we end up getting products that probably don't meet the intent, but it was the end of the contract, so you got to do it. And then you just get the best thing they can produce then. I assume, I would hope what it would kind of turn into as this goes is a IDIQ, so indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, because that's what I've seen a lot of commercialization for kind of SIBR 3s and companies where it's effectively an open contract that is literally indefinite. It just has a cap of money on it. And then they say, hey, whenever the JTACs have an extra 50 grand, they can put that there and then get something new on the product and then just slowly build the product they want, rather than it's just one set timeline, one set pricing, and then you move on. What's your DOE or Department of Energy? What are you building for them?
Yeah, we're building. It's for offshore wind. So since the kind of new president took over, he's been pushing offshore wind a lot, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
So the issue is, unless we want every single American wind farm to be built and operated by Europeans, We have to build an entire workforce from scratch. Um, Different problem than the Air Force, I would say. There's good and bad. The good is that we are starting from it's an open field. It's the Wild West in offshore wind, the U.S. Like it's people are just figuring things out, and it provides the opportunity for you to kind of step in. But it's bad in that it's like very early, so there's not defined requirements. Frankly, most like there's not a lot of money too either. There's enough for a startup to operate and do things, but like how do you get to there's not I can't turn around and get a 50 million IDIQ tomorrow in offshore.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
But the idea basically is creating like a more VR to get people to understand what these different jobs in offshore wind will be. So whether it's at port, on the turbine itself, on the vessels that take you from port to turbine, and just getting more Americans interested in joining the workforce.
Yeah, and I think that's I think we're scratching the surface on VR and more specifically XR, because every time I talk to one of my fellow pilots, and I'm like, no, like VR is cool. XR is what we're going to be using in 10 years, because the reality is the limitations that VR brings, their XR at some point, I think, and give me your feedback, is going to now give you all the benefits of VR with the benefits of like an F-16 trainer now, where it's just a big shell around you, or whatever, 18 screens around you that immerse you in a VR space, but you're sitting in a real world cockpit. Now the VR space is on your face, and then you just look down in your cockpit and the cockpit's there, and you flip switches and you do whatever you need to do. And just like a JTAC, there is very much a requirement for real world interaction and a VR space around you. So I hope, and I know it's going to get there. Just the timeline is when.
I would say it might be sooner than later.
Good.
So when we were doing our research on the JTAC projects, we found a ton of different VR treadmills. Like the one that we're likely going to go with is the monstrosity, in the sense that it's huge, and like you're not going to put it in your living room likely, at least not the current version of it, and it's
Yeah.
expensive, right? But we found other treadmills that are like perfect for consumers. We can't use them because a good amount of them are actually like designed and made in their Chinese companies,
Yeah.
so we can't use it. But no, a lot of these are like these treadmills they're kind of like slippy shoes, is the best way of putting it. So like it's a kind of a slippery surface, and you put on these special shoes, and you're not really walking, rather than like falling with style, essentially. Um, but those things are cheap enough that I mean consumers can probably start buying them and putting them in their house. Um, I would say the challenge of XR, the biggest challenge of XR is the hardware is going to get there, in my opinion. The hardware will eventually get there. It's going to be the software guys. It's like how do you create a unified, how do you make sure your VR app will actually work with these hardwares, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's also, frankly, an issue within the Air Force, right? A a downside with the SIBR process is that um, there's now like probably 500 C-130 VR trainers in the Air Force. Do we need 500 C-130 trainers? Maybe, maybe not.
Probably not.
They're probably all like there's a good amount that are probably doing the same thing. But there's also probably a good amount that are all doing a bunch of different things, right? I would assume Afrox is not signing off on the literal exact same training. But it's an opportunity, right? Like, how do you, if you are a startup and you identify, I don't know, oil change as a potential issue, oil change on the C-130 as a potential training deficiency, instead of having to spend money to remodel entire C-130, why don't you just like Afrox is like, here's a repository with a pre-made C-130 model, just use it, right?
Yeah.
Save yourself some time and money. Um, so that is probably one of the biggest issues within the XR community is that it's great that there's a lot of people doing a whole bunch of different things, hardware, software, XR, AR even, but getting kind of more of the software end at least talk to each other more. That's going to be a challenge for sure.
Well, and I think there's two phases, or there's two approaches. And I think the initial approach is exactly the way AFWERX and the Air Force is doing it, where it's a ton of companies, and there's 500 that are working on similar or very parallel programs. But at the end of the day, there has to be some top to bottom direction of, this is our horse and this is the direction we're going in. And then everything has to kind of fall under that umbrella, whether it's, the Air Force now purchases all this and then it becomes the Air Force's, like intellectual property, or the Air Force has a program that they all live under. But because we saw the same thing of, hey, build a VR, like a low cost VR trainer for pilot training. Mm-hmm. And they did, and it works great. And then they said, okay, now build low cost VR trainers for all your fighter training, because it's very different between pilot training and like a F-16 or an F-35 or any of that. It's a lot more jet interface, where in pilot training, it's student learning basics of flight. Yeah. So then the challenge changes. Well, what we end up finding is there's no roadmap. So again, we're going to get every MDS or every different aircraft is going to get a different solution, maybe multiple different solutions for the same aircraft. And then at the end of the day, they're going to have to say, this is our one, we're going to work through that. But I think it's the right start is, let's get everybody involved we can, get the best products available. And then once we get those best products, now we have to create one path.
I don't even think it has to be that heavy handed, where you have some, someone high up in a chain command and being like, hey, we're just going to go one specific, VR software. I don't actually think that's probably, in my opinion, I think that's probably not necessarily the best way of doing it, because I feel like you might be shutting off or disencouraging other people with different, ideas from entering. I think it probably, in my opinion, a more effective way of addressing this is let the resources be known of like, what if you want to make a C-130 VR trainer to solve fuel injection, you're a small business. Instead of like saying, we're going to go to this big VR company that's going to do all of it. Maybe if you're the Air Force and you own 3D models of the C-130 or 3D models of whatever, that's a huge part of making this. I cannot stress that enough. That's a massive expense, is making the 3D model. That might, for some companies, that might even be their main and only expense, especially if they're coming in with a training platform. So like making that available and letting companies use it, that might be, and this is frankly like what we're talking about. This is an internal battle within like Air Force. Like, how do you approach XR right now within the Air Force? Do we go with a heavy-handed top-down, the traditional route? We go one big-ass VR company, or even a current prime contractor, and just make all the VR through this one company? Or do we kind of make the tools open to tools that smaller companies can use and make their costs lower, and then just let a bunch of other vendors go in and make a lot more training? It's a big question. I recommend definitely checking out this company called Dynepic and Motar. Okay. They're being run by Detachment 23 or T3, and they're kind of in that latter half or latter camp of like, let's make as many tools available to these smaller businesses, so that if you want to create training, you can do so, but not as much expense. But now you have more small businesses and smaller teams kind of getting involved.
And I think one of the challenges, so kind of the other side, is if you're not part of the SBIR contract, so you're not a SBIR 2, and you walk up and say, I want that product also. The problem is you have to go through more traditional acquisitions side. And so what we ran into was, if you don't have pretty much I don't know what GSA stands for, but it's like a government something or other. But it's effectively, think a Amazon for government purchases, where you can just go on there and everything's been vetted and you just say, I want that one, purchase. Well, because SBIR companies don't live there, and a lot of these like random things like the moving the floor or the haptic gun. They're not on GSA. So if you want to purchase these things, the problem is the standard way to purchase stuff, especially when it gets into the like multiple thousands of dollars, you end up running into, you have to get 3 separate quotes by 3 companies. They have to be like, hey, why is this one better? You have to write this whole process of why you're purchasing it. So maybe I explained it incorrectly, but I agree with you. Like, we need a lot of options. It should be maybe more like a bespoke list where you just go in and it's like, I want that chair, I want that moving floor, I want the oil change, I want the engine maintenance for the C-130. You know what I mean? And you just get to select all of the things that you want to get, but you don't have to do the standard acquisitions process, because that's where we run into problems of, oh, you tripped $10,000 for this purchase. Now you have to do all the acquisition stuff. And then if it's not the cyberspace, you run into a brick wall of, hey, now it's going to take probably 3 or 4 months if we have the money. And if we don't have the money, then we put this up for what's called a UFR, an unfunded request. Yeah. And then hopefully if the correct type of funds are available close to the end of the year, then we will buy it. So it's unfortunate because how smooth the acquisitions process or the process of actually onboarding things in Cyber, it's almost 180 out once you have to just generic, like normal contract things, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, if I were to make one recommendation to any startups that want to do anything within the Air Force, specifically startups, make sure that, like what you described, we've been through that. It's painful. As a startup, you don't have time to wait for a contracting officer to figure all that out. So my one recommendation is make sure that you're also developing on the private sector space. That is hands down one of the biggest lessons I've learned in all of this is, like, you cannot put all of your, I mean, some people will be successful. They put all their eggs in the Air Force basket or the defense basket, but it's kind of more the exception than the norm, I would say. So definitely make sure you do have that healthy kind of private sector base. If it's not built yet, then I would recommend get started on building it out a lot more.
Yeah, I've heard kind of 70-30, you know, like you probably want the bulk of your efforts or your at least cash flow from private sector, mainly because you put up for a SIBR, it takes months to find out. You get awarded a SIBR and it's funded, and they're like, cool, you'll probably get the money in 8 months. And so you probably want something to keep the lights on until that money shows up. So yeah, because I've heard that by so many companies where they're like, hey man, like, how are we supposed to live this way? And it's like, I don't think you're supposed to. You're supposed to do exactly what you said. Like, you're supposed to have something else that's keeping you going. What are you guys doing on the kind of the public side or your commercialized side?
Yeah, so we have this, so nothing as intense as creating a treadmill of rifles and JTAC stuff. My office actually is kind of weird like that, where I have wind turbine there, and then literally on this side we have the rifle and a bunch of other crap there. It's more Air Force specific, but we're building this. It's essentially so we also have our services side, so companies can come to us and they're like, we want VR training, and we can build it for them. Or the big thing we've been getting is like VR experiences for kids. So if you're a kid and you want to know what is it like to be a surgeon, for example, plop on a headset, go and do a surgery and see if it's for you. So that's one use case. But one of the big things is we've been building this library of VR experiences, as I mentioned, for renewable energy, offshore wind specifically. And it's what we call a day in the life, and that allows different companies and students to understand what it would be like to work in the industry. But also we have like certified training. So we have a library of like certified VR training that technicians can actually use to get certified to work offshore.
That's cool. And it's not just a exposure tool, it's actually a certification tool. I just imagine when you said a day in the life, it's just like a 90-minute boat ride in VR. Just
we do have simulated seasickness, if that's what you're asking.
Well, it's funny, the stuff that again, just my kind of tiny little bubble in the VR space, but playing like DCS, if you pull too many G's in the game, it starts to kind of, you start to gray out and like black out. And I get super mad because I'm like, I know that I can actually pull these G's. Like, don't G lock me, you stupid game. So it's just funny that there's like seasickness and stuff, which I would definitely get seasick. That's for sure. I make myself air sick all the time.
Yeah. There's height sickness too in
height sickness.
There's also vertigo. It's also in our JTAC simulator. Like our map for that game is actually we sent a guy to Poland in Warsaw. That's what the unit requested, like of Eastern Europe. It was like when the project kicked off. Yeah, when the project kicked off, that was when like the whole Ukraine thing was going on. So
yeah,
or like Eastern Europe was a hot ticket. So we sent a guy to Poland, and like he went to this castle, and it's like a castle top. That's our vantage point, and it's like a sheer drop down. So we haven't run into any height issues or fear of height issues yet with JTACs, but maybe that could be a filtering thing too.
Yeah, they're pretty hardcore dudes. I've met a good amount of TAC Ps and CCT dudes, and I wouldn't mess with them. That's for sure. Well, it's funny because you say stuff like that, and there's I was in an elevator in Atlanta, and it was an all glass elevator in this hotel, and my son and I were standing there, and he's like, I want to go to like the 51st floor, but it was all glass, and it just opened to the center of the hotel. So as we started going, both of us kind of like stepped back from the edge as we got higher and higher, because it was like, I do not like this. Like, we're like 30 or 40 stories up, and you like couldn't even see the floor anymore. And we're like, ooh, that's not awesome. But yeah, that's funny.
Something else I've also learned from hanging out with a lot of JTACs, if you ever want to know where a bar is, they somehow have like this internal GPS or radar system where they just happen to know where every single bar is, even if it's a city they've never been in before. They just know.
They do. Well, they probably do like site surveys and prep study. Like I know how to.
ATAC. They just have like drop a bar on ATAC.
Oh, I guarantee it. There's some great dudes. How has that been? Because did you have any exposure to the military before you started working there, like with them?
Yeah, a little bit. Army, but not as much the Army. It was more researchers. Maintenance was kind of our main, like we had a lot more exposure with them. But maintenance guys are like, it's a different skill set. They're like different. It's different people that attracts people to like technical training. They're really smart dudes. Not saying JTACs aren't smart, but they're like their career and their job or day to day is a lot more like, how do you fix things? It's like it's almost like they're engineers, right? It's really interesting. They didn't seem like they were, they didn't seem like the soldiers that we met at Fort Campbell, right? These guys felt like we were like working with engineers. They're still definitely in the military, and then JTACs are like, they're fun dudes.
Yeah, well, and that's what
really different.
Yeah, and that's what we love. Like so you see it with different career fields, like you said. Just and you don't know if it's the culture of the career field creates the people, or the people just kind of like filter themselves into the correct career field. But we see it in airplanes, like the F-16 community, the F-15C community, the F-15E community, the F-22, the F-35. Like the F-35 is more of a mixed bag because it's like all the communities, the A-10 specifically. Yeah. But yeah, you meet JTACs and they're just like good dudes. Oh, what's that?
What I've noticed is a lot of them are, or at least the ones that we work with. I obviously I don't want to assume for every JTAC, but every JTAC we've worked with, they're like, if you could have like an embodiment of overachiever, like that's kind of what we've noticed is like, one of the guys we're working with right now, he went to Ranger School. I don't even think you have to go to Ranger School. We just freaking went anyway. Like he had a story where he was jumping out of a plane at jump school and he like tore his pec muscle on like the first of like many jumps, and he's like, fuck it, I'm just gonna keep jumping. And he jumped the next jumps. He wasn't able to use his like right arm. He was just using his left arm to like adjust the parachute. Like who does that? Like,
Yeah, those dudes. Well, and that's what you find out is they're an amazing combination of physicality and smarts. You know, they're physically capable. They're gonna do athletic feats that you're like, I don't think I could do that. But then you talk to them and you're like, you are knowledgeable. Like you are a smart man. You have put in work. You know, because you think about it, they need to understand. So like a CCT or TACP who becomes a Joint Tactical Air Controller, their job is to not only be able to shoot the guns and move on the ground and do all the stuff that is expected of someone on the ground in a firefight. They also have to understand their radios. They have to understand their ATAC that they're operating with. So then, they can troubleshoot radios. They can work on that kind of stuff. And then they now need to own the stack, which is every aircraft that's above them. And then they now need to keep track of all their friendlies because now guys are moving around because they need to make sure that bombs go only on bad guys. And then while this is all happening, they're getting fed information from probably the ground force commander or the GFC. And then he's saying, put a bomb on there or do something like this. This is the effect I want. And then the JTAC says, I have F-16s above me. They checked in with GPS guided bombs, laser guided bombs, 20 millimeter. And then they will say, hey, ground force commander's intent is, this is what I'm looking for. Here's say when you're ready for your 9-line. So, I mean, it's not the I'm going to carry a heavy ruck and I'm going to go real far. It's all of the above. I'm going to do the job on the ground. And then these guys who show up in airplanes, I'm going to know what the airplane can do and use them effectively. So I'm always impressed with those dudes. I'm always happy to go buy them a beverage because they're good dudes and I appreciate the work they do.
You ever been to the Chapman Complex? It's used to be called Medina Complex or the Medina kind of detachment at Lackland.
I have not.
Okay. Well, so Chapman Complex is where they do a lot of kind of like the I guess their tech school for JTAC training. It is like it's interesting to put it it's cool. They have like the state of the art like NFL like when I saw their gym and stuff, it looked like something out of like Alabama state like football, like some tier one like super insane gym with they have just snacks everywhere and stuff because apparently they're not getting enough calories every day. It's madness. But you're right. They're super smart. It's basically like it reminds me a little bit of like almost the frats in college, but everyone there has like a 4.0 GPA too. It's kind of crazy to see. Like I didn't like. It's kind of insane that people like that exist, but I guess we kind of need them.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the cool thing is they create that community. They create the environment around them that they want to do well and they want to do well for others because as these JTACs, these CCT and TACPs become JTACs, which is an entire course in and of itself, and then they move on and then they get into the STS world, which is kind of the more advanced side of the JTAC side. So you can be ASOS or STS, and then once they're STS, they can even kind of progress even farther. So I mean, they are exceptional performers and they stratify to get into their career field, and then they stratify once in their career field. So they're great. If you meet a JTAC, anybody listen to this, listen to some stories because they definitely have some good ones. Because in airplanes, we go and visit the fight, and JTACs and all these people, they live in the fight. So appreciate them. Tell them thank you. Well, Eagle, it's been awesome chatting. How can everybody contact you if they want to reach out and get some VR action?
Yeah. I guess actually, since most of your audience is Air Force, we do need serious help on our JTAC project, actually. So if you are a JTAC, whether current or former, please reach out. We'll love to hear and get your feedback on what we're building. You can reach out to us either on our website, so that's www.vinci-vr.com. It's currently all set up for our offshore wind stuff, so don't get thrown off by it. It's the right website. Or you can reach out to my email. It's just ewu@vinci-vr.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Eagle, for being on. Everybody, if you want to contact us or be on the show, info@kodiakshack.com or check out our website, kodiakshack.com. Remember, like, subscribe, share. Tell us what we're doing well and what we're not doing so well. If you know people you want to hear about on the show, then go ahead and shoot us an email. Let us know what we're missing so we can keep providing good content for everyone. Eagle, thanks. See you, man.